one of my biggest theories is making practice fun. I want our guys to show up and enjoy practice, have it be one of the best parts of their days. And I would like to think that as they become coaches themselves or go on to bigger and better things, that they can add that part of our culture into what they do.
What's up and welcome to Ahead of the Curve. I am Jonathan Gellner, and thank you so much for joining us. This episode is brought to you by Baseball Cloud. Baseball Cloud's revolutionary software platform brings to life the numbers captured by TrackMan and FlexScope. This provides colleges, players, and facility owners around the world a turnkey product, allowing them to analyze their data using key metrics and custom visualizations on one intuitive user interface. Go to baseballcloud.com to find out how you can have your own data analytics department for your program. Data has a story to tell, and Baseball Cloud gives it a voice. On today's show, I interview Jon Shehan, head baseball coach at Millersville University in Millersville, Pennsylvania. Jon and I discuss the importance of coaches being humble and admitting when they don't know everything. We also go into some detail about different ways we can create an enjoyable practice environment to make players love coming every day. And we also talk about ways that we as coaches can do a better job of adjusting to each player's needs. Here is Jon Shehan. Jon, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Jonathan. It's a pleasure.
Absolutely. Great name, by the way. I mean, we both share the Jon. Is your full name Jonathan, actually?
Yes, sir. Yes, it is.
Yes. It's always good to meet a fellow Jonathan, and you know that is the best name in the world. But we were talking off the mic, and a couple of years ago, you were on the KW podcast, and I'm a lifelong learner, and I loved what you were doing with your program, and for years it has really stuck out in my mind as a guy that I followed on Twitter afterwards, and seeing that you getting creative with your time constraints and money constraints and different things like that. And you have been a guy that I followed for a long time. And for our listeners who don't know you as well as I do, can you give us a short snapshot of why you decided to get into coaching, and then we'll dig right in on player development?
Sure. I mean, 13 years in as a head coach now. And I think it was maybe 6 or 7 years ago that I was on KW's podcast. So that It's been a little while, but things have certainly changed, but there's a lot that's still the same. But I feel like I was kind of put in this position not by choice in a lot of ways, because I know there's a lot of guys out there that want to be a head coach that have been working really, really hard. And I feel like I've been pretty blessed to be put into a head coaching position. I was interim for a year after working for a guy named Jeff Swore, who's actually coaching my alma mater now at Lampeter Strasburg High School, which is a pretty good program in the Central Pennsylvania area. But Jeff hired me out of pro ball, and I was there for a year and a half as his assistant. And long story short is we had 9 major violations from the guy before us that we had to clean up. We didn't have a field on campus, and Jeff was in an extremely tough spot, and he decided to back down after 2 seasons, and they gave me the interim position as a 25-year-old. So I had no idea what I was doing. And looking back now, the creativity that you talk about, I mean, it was one of those things that you either sink or swim. And there's a lot of times where I'm looking up underwater, just sucking for air, but you learn to survive and still here 13 years later. So that's the short end of it. We now have a beautiful field, and there's been just so much out of my control that's kind of fallen into place for us that I look back and go, how in the world do we get here some days? But it is good to be grateful for where I'm at and know that some guys will work their whole lives to be a head coach and be at their alma mater. So I'm really happy to be here and continuing to coach here at Millersville.
I love that, and I love getting to hear your progression as a coach. And so let's go back. You know, you're a 25-year-old, you're taking the reins of the program. And I honestly, I can't imagine doing that. I thought that I was ready at 25, and now I'm at 30, and I'm still feel like, oh man, what was I thinking 5 years ago, thinking that I could be the head coach of a program? And not to say that you didn't do a fantastic job, because I know that you did, but you know, looking back, I'm like, man, okay, yeah. So we definitely get wiser with age. But so you're 25 years old, and you are taking the reins of a program. You know, what did the vision look like for you? And you mentioned some different, again, you guys had some problems that you had to deal with immediately. So what were some of your first steps whenever you got the head coaching role and you're like, okay, these are the things that we're going to tackle first?
I'll start with the vision. There are a lot of people on campus that thought I was completely nuts, and a lot of people in the area too. And I think I was naive, and it was actually a blessing that I was naive, because when people said you can't turn that program around or you guys are never going to win there, which historically, I mean, we had been to the World Series in '98 shortly before I played here, but it was a roller coaster ride from the '70s onward, and we hadn't really consistently won here. But so there's a lot of people that didn't think that we would be successful, especially now with the 25-year-old and no head coaching experience. But one of the things, and we were talking with one of our retired development officers who has been just crucial for our program. She's raised a boatload of money for us and got her field named and helped us get turf a few years ago on our infield. She just said the other day, one of the things that drew her to our program was the 30-year plan that I put together. And as a 25-year-old, just didn't see a 30-year plan come together. But again, I was just completely naive and said, what if we had turf on our infield? What if we had a clubhouse? What if we put double cages in? What if we were able to afford, even back then, some technology that would help the kids? What if we were number one in the PSAC East in scholarships? And then asking those questions with vision first and not really knowing how to get there opened up some minds like hers who had experience in fundraising and allowed us to dream a little bit. Now you look back 13 years later, and a lot of those things have come full circle, and they're here. We have them. It's been pretty cool to see that all come together. So it taught me a lot. I mean, for the young coaches out there, man, just don't be afraid to dream. You're going to have a lot of administrators that say how. I listened to Andy Stanley podcast one time, and he said we shouldn't be saying how as leaders. We should be saying wow, and never say never.
No, fantastic.
It's kind of been a mantra for me.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, you've done a lot with what you've got in such a short period of time. And so let's talk about this year and the present. And you mentioned just now that some of the different things that you guys have done in the past, but let's talk about this fall. And we're smack dab right in the middle of it as this recording is going on. And let's talk about player development. Let's talk about what you guys are doing with the time that you have and the staff that you have. So if you don't mind, start off with what does your staff look like? Just how many guys do you have helping? What are your time constraints? And then let's jump right into what a typical week looks like.
Sure. I'm the only full-time coach on staff. We have technically a part-time guy who just busts his tail, David Baker. He's our pitching coach. He does most of the recruiting for us in the summertime and in the fall. He does a fantastic job. He's been with me for 11 out of the 13 years. He was a player for 2 years towards labrum and came back as a student assistant and then just kind of stayed on as a volunteer. And he's done everything here except be head coach. So he's my right-hand man and he's super valuable. And then after that, we have a volunteer assistant named Bill Sassman. He's a 30-year head coach at a local high school, just retired this past year and brings a world of knowledge. He brings that old school approach that I think is really important to balance out a younger staff. We have a baseball ops guy who actually wants to be an ops guy full time. He's a volunteer ops guy. He just finished his degree last year, and Kyle's been doing a fantastic job with travel and some fundraising and equipment and all that good stuff that we know some guys hate to do, but there's other guys like him who are passionate about it. And then we have, I believe it's 4 student assistants. It's hard to keep track right now. We have so many of them, but those guys are super selfless. They show up, set up equipment before practice, do a lot of our data work in the office, even database work for camps. And I've learned the last 13 years that the guys that work for nothing are probably your most valuable resource, and you got to find ways to thank them and keep them involved and keep challenging them as well. Not overwork them, but challenge them.
Definitely. Well, let's go into what a typical week would look like for your players. And what have you guys decided to, because we all have different time constraints in the fall, what have you guys decided to spend time on? And if you don't mind, give us a rundown on why you decided to spend time on that.
Sure. I think the way baseball is going is pretty intimidating with all the data, technology, the development process. It seems like you need to have a PhD to be a baseball coach. And at first it started pitching, and now we're on the hitting, and it's intimidating. I've talked to a lot of guys at Division I level, and they said, man, I'd just like to be a head coach because I just feel like I'm going to get run out of the game if I don't get a lot more intelligent in this area. And they're partly right, because I think that's where baseball is definitely going and has gone. So, long story short here is that we have completely revamped our pitching and hitting philosophies probably in the last 3 or 4 years. And it's a continuing evolution, but I was always an approach, and we'll start with hitting. I was always an approach-based guy. I mean, we approach, and we still are, because I think that's probably one of the 4 we look at from a data aspect. It's probably one of the 4 areas that we really focus in on is approach and game-like batting practice and game-like preparation. But incorporating the technology has been a slow but tedious process. We got in with Diamond Kinetics a couple of years ago, and I know a lot of guys are blast guys, but it was more Diamond Kinetics was there and asked us more than anything. And I said, sure, we'll take a look at this. And it's taken probably 3 years for us to really understand what we're looking at data-wise and how we can actually incorporate into our workouts and correctives and build swings and really develop the individual. We got Rapsodo as well for hitters, and the batted ball data combined with the swing sensor data has been crucial. Sometimes it's more so to, as coaches, knowing what we have a feel for what we're looking at. Say, take a negative approach angle, for example. We feel, we can kind of see that the swing path is down, or a guy's late and he's hitting the ball really deep in his swing and his approach angle is negative. But being able to take that data then and show it to the player has been crucial for us, because so many of these guys feel like things are going the right way. But I think what we've done is speed up the development process in terms of, we'd always give a guy a year to figure it out. And, oh man, well, he hit 320 and he hit 5 home runs and we're not going to mess with it. Whereas now with player development, I know I'm going on a tangent here, but with player development, it's given us the opportunity to speed up that clock and start earlier, because we can already see what's going on and we can show the player right away what's going on from a swing aspect. And they buy in quicker because they can tell, man, this is a problem. This is a swing flaw, or my movements are flawed. So, but go back to your question. You're talking about a week in the fall and what we're focusing on, right?
Sure.
Yeah. So taking all that information and then applying it to a practice plan in a week, it's challenging. It's more challenging than ever, especially as a head coach trying to be a hitting guy. We've built in some early work for our hitters and our pitchers. So we really try to get an hour in the cage each day, an hour in the bullpen each day with groups of 4 or 5. And that's something that David Baker, our assistant pitching coach, incorporated when he took over, is instead of having 18 pitchers during batting practice trying to all get their catch play in at separate times, it's taking 4 or 5 and starting at 1 o'clock and giving them, a 45-minute session out there in our bullpen. And that's really, really helped us from a development aspect, because the 18th guy on our pitching staff is getting just as much love as the number 1.
Right.
And I think that's crucial. You just never know. You never know who's going to turn around and revive his career and become a guy with individual attention. So
definitely. And I love that you are putting individual player development at the forefront of your training. And I think that speaks volumes as to, who you are as a coach and what you're trying to build and continuing to build, because it's, like you mentioned, it's not easy at all, especially being shorthanded, trying to incorporate technology and individual player development plans. It's not easy at all. And I understand where you're coming from as far as that. And I'm not the head coach, but I understand that aspect of it. And so you mentioned, whenever you took over, there were some things that you wanted to change. And a lot of people thought that, it would be a tough road to go down. And you mentioned that earlier in the podcast as well. But what about culture building? Like, how did you change the mindset of what you guys were trying to do at Millersville? And how did you get players to start buying into, hey, we can win here. We may not have a field on our place. We may not have a turf infield yet. And we may have some different restrictions that are placed upon us, but we can do this. So tell us about that process.
We had a tremendous group of players that came in 2007. They were 9-37, and going 9-37 is going to create character no matter what. I mean, we had a rough year to say the least, and we opened up. It's funny because we lost the national championship a couple years ago to Nova Southeastern. We opened up with Nova that year and just got obliterated in a 3-game series. And it was eye-opening for those guys. We had 4 or 5 of those kids that ended up redshirting at one point or another in their career, and they were on the World Series team that we had in 2011. So I think part of that turnaround had to do with the growth of those 5 kids in particular. And one of them is now our athletic director, believe it or not. And I get to work with him and work for him every day. And it's just one of those things that you look back and go, is this even real? But that's the type of kid that I was blessed to be able to work with.
That's awesome.
Talk about a guy that's becoming an athletic director at the age of 30 and doing a fantastic job. But, you look back and you say, okay, somebody put their foot down at some point. And I remember a particular instance where we had a kid named Derek Klein who actually got drafted as a pitcher. He hit a walk-off home run to sweep Bloomsburg in 2008. And at the time we were maybe 9-20 that year. And it flipped the switch. And our guys all of a sudden said, we can win. Like, this is possible. We need to compete. But we need to go out with the belief every day that we can win baseball games. And that kind of changed things. That group was not even close to as talented as the teams that we have now, but they were special from that aspect. They were super, super competitive. But I would say culturally, the little things, not parking in staff spaces on campus and using sidewalks and taking your hat off in the building and little things that show respect to other people. That got our maintenance guys on board and got our athletic director on board, and it got our fundraising people on board, and it got our dining hall people on board. And when you get everybody aligned, when the head coach forgets bag lunches for the road trip, you can call the dining hall up and they can help you out.
Right.
All of those things are crucial to building a championship program. And it starts on the inside with the players, but it's a campus-wide effort. And I think that particular group bought into, I don't know why Coach is making us take our hat off, but if that's what he wants us to do, we'll do it. And I think it was just something different that we still shave. We're still old school. We're using lots of technology, but when it comes to our values, I think we're an old school group we base our culture on service and others. And we're not the centerpiece of campus. We're a part of campus, and we're trying to enhance our campus and enhance the people on our campus. And I think when you keep that at bay, or you keep that in the forefront of what you're doing, it's much easier to get people behind your program as well.
Right. You're trying to build the person before the baseball player. I love that.
No doubt about it. And that continues. I sit here in the recruiting process and talk to every kid and their family, and I'll tell them that, I can sit here and sell you on player development, and we can talk about technology, and we can go through all the correctives from a pitching aspect that you might be going through. We can break down your biomechanics on video, and we can go to strength conditioning and talk to our strength conditioning coach for hours on how we're going to improve you as a player. But at the end of the day, our values aren't going to change. That's what you're signing up for, because we may find something better next week that we're gonna adapt and put into our program from a development aspect. But the values are what guys are signing up for, and that's never going to change as long as I'm here.
Well, that's fantastic. And again, it comes back to everything for me comes back to building a safe environment and building relationships with our players, and they feel safe to share with us. They feel safe to ask us questions. That's got to be the baseline, and Daniel Coyle talks about that in all great cultures. Set that first, and that's perfectly what you're saying currently, and what you're trying to continue to build on a daily basis, and something we should all strive to do. But what are some different advice that you would go about building relationships with players? And I don't mean this to be in a way of, okay, we have a system to where we're trying to fit all of our players in, and this is what you have to do to build a relationship with a player. But what are some different ways that you try and build relationships with every player? Because again, I'm a hitting coach, and it sounds like you're on the offensive side as well. And there are times that we won't see the POs for a couple days at a time. And how do we make sure that we're connecting with every player as much as possible?
Sure. We've got to be intentional about it. And I know one of the things we talked about prior to is what's something I believe in that other coaches may disagree. And it is coaching relationally. I think making it intentional that we are building relationships with each and every individual on the team, even though it's a competitive environment. And maybe one of the toughest things we have to do, I look at the scene in Moneyball where they have to cut a player, and they purposely don't build relationships because of the tough decisions that they have to make as an organization. And it makes me sick to my stomach. And being a guy that had a very small cup of coffee in pro ball, it was something that drove me early in my career. And I hopefully I'm still early in my career here, but 12 or 13 years ago, it was one of those things that drove me was the lack of information and player development love, so to speak, that was given to the peon bullpen catcher that played on Sunday. That guy, just as much as the first rounder, wants to know what he can do to get better, and he wants to know where he falls on the depth chart. And and taking, a 2-minute conversation to have with that guy could change his career. Man, there's a lot of great stories now, player development guys, the Max Muncys of the world that have revived their careers and become everyday big leaguers and all-stars because of those conversations that are being had. So back to your question, I mean, I think the personal development with players, it's taking the time to actually have real conversations with them. And I know it is exhausting because we want to sit in the office and we got to raise money and we got to plan practice and we got to look into the latest technology and we got to do accountable related activity hours and do all this stuff for compliance. And there's the camp to run on the weekend and it never ends. But at the end of the day, I think one of the reasons our program's been successful is we have a coaching staff, not just myself, that takes the time to open our office door. We've got guys sitting on our couch constantly to the point sometimes I got to kick them out because there is time that I got to get work done. But our shortstop went away this summer. He played a couple weeks in California, then he went to the Hamptons League, won a championship there. And then when they finished up in the Hamptons League, he went to the Northwoods League. And he called me in August when the Northwoods got over and he said, Coach, for some reason, the guys that I played with all summer, this theme that they just don't like who they play for is more evident than ever. And it's not about being friends with our guys, but man, why is it impossible for us as coaches to have a long-term relationship with our players? I mean, they should like us. We should be an impact on their lives for the long haul. And it's kind of mind-blowing to me to think that there are so many college kids out there who just don't enjoy what they do every day. And it starts with us having real conversation with them, listening, asking them questions, and just spending time with them.
No, right. And it's got to be authentic. I think that our players are fairly large lie detectors, and they can tell whenever we're being inauthentic as well. And that I hate to hear that for those players. And I think that a big part of it comes back to communication and trying to take the time to talk to the 25th guy and not just your shortstop every day and your leadoff hitter. And I, that's something that I've consistently had to work on, especially like I mentioned before with like POs or position groups that I don't necessarily work with every day. And so that's something I think that we can all strive for, is just to better communicate the situation or better try and have a conversation with them about something other than baseball as often as we can, because, you never know, like you said, a kid may turn it around or a kid may be going through something, and having a conversation with you as the head coach or me as an assistant coach can help turn it around for them, maybe not on a baseball field, but off of it. And I think that's huge. And you've also talked about your different assistant coaches, and it sounds like that, man, they are grinding it out every day. And how do you make their life easier? Like, what are you doing to help them develop as coaches, and take us through your vision for assistants and helping them to grow to be the best that they can be?
We've got a fairly small coaching tree, to be honest, and I don't know if that's a positive thing or a negative thing, but Eric Suplee is up at Columbia as a pitching coach, and then one of our other former assistants is actually the head assistant at North Carolina State softball. So I was pretty close to ruining a relationship with both of those guys. They were the assistant coaches during my first year, and they will tell you that I was the worst staff manager in the history of college baseball at that point. I was a 25-year-old managing a 23 and a 22-year-old and trying to figure it all out. But now the three of us are actually really, really close. We talk all the time. And what I learned from those guys, I'll never forget, Suplee actually came back, and he spent a year with us, 2 or 3 years later. I think it was 2012 he was here. And he was on his way to Wake Forest in another year as a volunteer for Coach Walter down there. But Eric said, "You are my boss, and I need you to tell me what to do in certain situations, and I need direction." And that was an enlightening conversation. I'll never forget it. And I just think that as leaders, we've got to be super clear. People want to follow clarity, and it's almost become a buzzword in our program. But clarity is super, super important to our staff culture in terms of creating job duties, keeping guys accountable to getting those job duties accomplished, and not being afraid to have a tough conversation when things aren't getting done I think that's where we grow. And unfortunately, most leaders are afraid to have those conversations. But I don't want to sound like I'm a negative head coach and I'm really hard on our coaching staff, but I think it's really important to be able to have a closed door conversation with younger coaches and say, here's where we need to get better. Here's where we need to improve. And I failed at that over the years. So I'm going to be really honest. And it is really, really tough to have those real conversations and not complain about guys behind their back. But I think that's, again, being intentional with that is important. Talked about challenging guys earlier a little bit, finding that magic space where you're taking a volunteer or a part-time guy and giving him enough to fill his plate so that he's growing, but also not overworking him to the point where he's not having a good experience and he doesn't want to coach as a result. And that's a hard line to walk for those of us that deal with the true volunteer, because I know there's a lot of volunteers that get paid fairly well, at the upper level of college baseball, but at our level, we need every person we can to get on board, and, delegating at different levels, whether it be just hey, we need to get this database done, or you're going to be in charge of all the Rapsodo data, both pitching and hitting. That's a huge job for somebody in our program, and figuring out who's capable and then coaching them up and continue to check in on them so that they know that what they're doing is really important.
For sure. And that's something that, again, it's especially when working with data, you could feel like you are swimming at times, and it sounds like you're putting guys in the position that best suits their skill set, and I love that, and I think that's a great sign of a head coach, regardless of what you said about your 25-year-old self. I think you've made some definite progress, which is awesome. But also, you guys you mentioned about the hats, and you mentioned about not parking in staff parking. And so what are some other rules or just standards that you have in your program? And you talked a lot about your first group of guys that just bought in and they followed you. I think that most coaches can trace it back to a group that decided to be selfless and to put their team first. And I love hearing your story about that. And so what are the standards that have continued throughout your program? And they may change a little bit from year to year, but what are kind of your core values, your standards, or just the things that the players are looking to understand how to shape their behavior?
We have 4 covenants, which came from Brian Kane years ago. And they're selfless and relentless. And I know there's some other programs that actually have those same core values, core covenants. But one of the interesting things that we do as a team the first week of class every year is go over those core covenants and first ask, are there any other values that we need to add? And it's always brought up some interesting conversation but to this point, even though we've had opportunity, we haven't changed those values. They've stayed the same. We haven't added any new ones. But from those values, then we actually take a closer look. What does selfless look like in the classroom, in practice, in the community, and then on the field during competition? And then what does relentless look like in those 4 areas as well? And there are very consistent things that pop up every year. There's some new ones that come in, and it's fluid. It changes a little bit every year, but each team takes ownership of those values at that point. And here are some of the habits that we display on campus or in summer ball or during community service hours or whatever you may have, or obviously in the classroom as well. But to answer your question, that's where those come from. It's having those conversations. And I remember one example was I forget which book it was, but we were trying to build trust. I actually believe it was Legacy, about the All Blacks. Great. And how they wore. Have you read it, Jonathan?
Oh, it's top 3 all time. Absolutely.
Yeah, fantastic read. Well, I got this great idea that we were going to wear our high school jerseys or our favorite team, professional team jersey on the first bus ride of the year, because we had a lot of new guys. We're still trying to build some trust and have some conversation and get to know each other. And we had our pictures taken in front of the bus at the first restaurant stop on our way south. And we're all wearing these different jerseys. And I had probably 20 texts in the next hour from alumni who saw the picture on Instagram and said, "Where are your collared shirts?" And they were literally angry that we weren't wearing collared shirts. And I know there's other programs that wear collared shirts, that wear ties, that get on the road and look professional. But I think that our values, those habits that are around those values, are so deep that it literally fired up our alumni and had them upset about how we looked on the road. And that's not the Marauder way. So that's one of them, is looking professional on the road. I think our guys walk into the team hotel where other teams are staying, especially during conference tournament or regional time, and they feel like we're in championship mode and we're not better than other teams, but maybe more prepared. That's the mentality that they have. We still have a shave rule. I know it may not be the most ethical thing, but it's also built some accountability. I mean, I don't talk about shaving very little anymore, but we've got upperclassmen that will literally turn a guy away at the gate or the clubhouse and say, you need to go take care of that. Look professional, which is hard. I mean, that's probably taken 10 years of building that upperclassmen, learning how to keep guys accountable. Cleaning the clubhouse. I mean, that's an upperclassman job. We have upperclassmen that will clean, sweep, vacuum our clubhouse. Again, sweeping the sheds, coming from Legacy. It's something that we've taken into our program from them. We wear sunglasses on the back of the hat, not on the front. We don't cover up our logo. That was an Atlanta Braves thing. Mm-hmm. Just learning how to wear the uniform the right way and taking pride in that M that we wear every day rather than covering up. So a lot of old school stuff. It's the old school culture mentality that our guys have learned to really love our program and love Millersville.
No doubt. And so we've talked a lot about, your culture in the fall, and I love designing practice and practice plans and trying to be as efficient as possible. And so whenever you get to the spring, we have another time constraint, which is we have games, and we want to be able to take into account energy levels, and your guys are going to class, my guys are going to class, and trying to take all that into consideration. But what are some different practice plan tips that you've found, or you can, if you don't mind, you could take us through a typical practice, what it looks like, and just kind of how your mind works on how to get what we need to in. And besides the fact of coming to watch you practice, what would we see and what would kind of stand out?
Sure. Well, that individual time is going to start middle of the afternoon. And so we'll have open time in the cage where I'll do my best to be down there and out of the office and escape for a little while with our hitters. And that's when we get all the technical stuff out of the way and our proprioceptive work, their field work, a lot of the video work will get done then. Pitchers are the same thing, that they're out in the bullpen getting their correctives work in. If they have a bullpen that day, it's typically before practice. 3:00, position players will do their stretch, warm up, band work, their posterior shoulder work, and then they'll throw. We'll go through a throwing program. It depends on the day. We try to stretch out the capsule, 3 or 4 times a week, and then pull down maybe twice a week. We do a ton of throwing in the fall and the spring from a position player aspect. So throwing program is daily, but we've changed it a little bit through the years, not to get too deep into the throwing program, but adding some functional throwing at the end, whether it be that's the time catchers are fielding bunts and throwing to first base, or maybe it's doing some 4-corner flips with infielders, or maybe it's cuts and relays right at that point, or we do a thing called outfield square drill where we have all 3 outfielders are throwing to 3 different bags at the same time. But adding in some functional throwing immediately after our throwing program has been a time saver for us. And then we'll start team practice about 3:30. We'll probably do 5 to 10 minutes of a skull session. Right now we're going back through. You mentioned Daniel Coyle, but just trying to explain myelination a couple of weeks ago to our hitters who want a quick fix with everything that they're doing offensively. Mm-hmm. And we started going through the talent code, and
another great one,
which is fantastic read for individual development. So we've been taking that and breaking it down for about 10 minutes a day, which has been a great growth opportunity for our staff and our players. Once we finish that, we'll go into probably the most inefficient thing we do, which is team defense. I haven't figured out a way where we can go through bunt plays and pickoffs and rundowns and force balks and pop-up priority and actually do it in an efficient manner, because there are points where we need to break some things down and take 20 to 30 minutes a day and really not perfect those plays. But I could count every season, our season could come down to 4 or 5 bump plays that we either execute or we don't. So, I mean, they're crucial things that we've got to get done. And it's painful sometimes because we all would rather be doing individual hitting work or individual pitching work, or, working defensively with our catchers, our infielders, our outfielders, but it's got to get done. So we do it. at that point, the pitchers are coming out of before the team talk, our pitchers are coming out of the bullpen or the clubhouse, depending on when their individual session was. They'll typically spend an hour and a half after they get their hour work in the pen each day. They'll have another hour and a half where we'll do team defense, and then individual defense. They help us out with hitting some fungos, and then generally they're done for the day. It's short and sweet. Get your work in, get out. Hitters will stay for BP then. And I know we probably want to talk about BP in a little bit more depth, but we'll hit for 45 minutes to an hour. I think I might have skipped individual. Once we get done with team defense, we'll do about 20 to 30 minutes of individual defense. Each area will have a focus each day. It might be as simple as backhands for infielders as your focus for the day, and we'll have 4 or 5 backhand drills. And then one of our staples is square drill. I stole it from Tim Corbin, visited Vanderbilt in 2011, was enamored with how they made something as simple as taking 4 fungos and at the same time and turning it into a competitive environment. And it's funny to me because everybody's like, oh, well, if you had 17 staff members and you could chart all of that. But what I noticed with them is that Coach Corbin follows the rules in terms of practice time and who's at practice and who's hitting the fungo. And they were able to accomplish everything with the same size staff that we have. Mm-hmm. So we incorporated square drill, competitive. Everybody's taking fungos. They probably get 50 to 100 fungos depending on how long it takes each day. And every one of those fungos is charted. And, we have clean glove plays, clean throws, bobbles, throwing errors, fielding errors, and it gets pretty competitive. Guys want to get it done pretty clean every day because they want to see their fielding percentages stay at the top of the list, and we post those weekly.
Well, that's fantastic.
But outfitter, yeah, it's a great, and I'm sure Coach Corbs, not to throw him under the bus, but I bet he would share it with you. And he did an entire ABCA convention talk on square drill and competitive defensive practice. But outfitters and catchers as well, getting their individual time in there for about half an hour, and then we go into batting practice, and that'll last for 45 minutes or so. Every once in a while, I'd say probably 2 to 3 times a week, we throw a curveball in where we're going to do some type of scrimmaging, whether it be a bunt scrimmage or a 2-pitch scrimmage. We do something called just do scrimmaging, which is a competitive situational scrimmage. We'll either do it off a coach pitch or off a pitching machine. And the theme might be first and thirds, where we'll give you 3 first and third plays that everybody's got to execute. And they get 2 pitches to do it on, and groups of 3 or 4 might be their batting practice groups, but we'll go through that, just kind of a mass rep, game speed rep with full defense on situational hitting, where it takes the batting practice where they hit a line drive to right field with a man on second base and nobody out. That's head high, where you might advance, but he might not advance, and they don't really think about it because they hit a barrel and it felt really good, and they just move on to the next swing and they go, oh crap, you know what? When I actually put a base runner out there and I put a defense on the field, that doesn't play. Mm-hmm. It's been great for our guys to play game speed situations. So, but that's kind of how practice runs on a daily basis, and that's the structure that we have. And I don't think it's more than 2.5 to 3 hours can just kill your efficiency at practice. We laugh and say efficiency, but like your work is meaningless at some point.
Right. I'm definitely with you. And you mentioned that you guys do some different competitive situations as far as square drill and individualization within or in indie work, essentially. Are there any other competitions that come to mind?
Absolutely. I could probably do an entire podcast on integrating competition into practice and just player development. But yeah, we've got nutrition. We chart our nutrition on MyFitnessPal. It's a free app. It's an Under Armour app. Our guys chart it every single day. They turn the numbers into our ops guy on Friday mornings in the weight room, and we post it. We have a Google Drive for the team. I'm not sure if we're supposed to have one or not with our university, but at the end of the day, we use Google Drive for a lot of things, and we post all of our statistics on Google Drive. So nutrition's one of them, and everybody's got an open link. They can go in and see where they stand. And you say, how do you compete with nutrition? And, because some guys have different goals. It's just, they post their goals on their calorie intake and their macros. And it's pretty easy to see who is staying, close to their goals each week. And again, there's accountability there, and guys know who's working hard, not just on the field, but but in the dining hall as well. And it's a huge staple to what we've done from a body aspect. And we're seeing some guys, we had scout day yesterday, man, that kid lost 30 pounds, or he looks stronger this year. And that's a test to our nutrition planning. Quality plate appearances, it's old school, I know, but there is still a lot of value in keeping track of quality plate appearances. Diamond Kinetics, they came out with a new spreadsheet system where you can compete, post the spreadsheet, and different strokes for different folks. I mean, you got a lot of different guys with different swing planes and different things. But again, the posting of that information makes it competitive, and put a stopwatch on something, and guys are going to be driven to do it faster. And I think anytime you post information, make it public, guys are going to want to do a better job. So if we do live defense during batting practice, it's probably more important for our outfielders than anything else. But every time they touch a ball in live defense, they get a touch for it. Anytime they dive for a ball, they get a dive. Anytime they catch a ball, it's a put out. So you'll see our outfielders, you get the power shag going. I know a lot of guys would call it that, but again, they're competing. So somebody's sitting there with a chart tallying up how many balls their center fielder catches and touches during practice. So our squad games are all competitive. There's a process-oriented goal for each of our squad games, whether it be hard hit balls on Rapsodo or strikes or even count strikes for our pitchers. There's always some type of point system that's put in for squad games that makes it competitive. Obviously, all the pull down stuff, all of our velo stuff that we're starting to get into once we get our guys moving the way we want to move on the mound. We start getting into more of the competitive velocity programming that we're doing for I'd say the majority of our pitchers. Again, that's pretty easy. I mean, how hard do you throw? I mean, who doesn't enjoy throwing the ball hard as a competition? But the latest stuff, I mean, the hitting stuff it's awesome. There's a lot of programs out there doing it. I know Iowa's done a fantastic job. I've read a bunch of their stuff, but creating a competitive environment, not just with exit velocity, but one that we like is the ladder drill for bat skills. Guys that can have trouble controlling their barrel, figuring out a way to hit a 10-degree line drive, and then figure out a way to hit a 20-degree line drive, and then figure out a way to hit a 30-degree line drive. Those are fantastic drills if you have the means to get some batted ball data on your guys. So
sure.
Lots and lots to talk about.
Yeah, no doubt. I love all of that. And I may be stealing the nutrition thing because we've got guys that weigh 130 pounds and you're like, guys, the bat's swinging you. And you'll say, hey, are you trying to gain weight? And they'll be like, yeah. And I'm like, are you tracking your calories? They're like, no. And I'm like, then you're not trying to gain weight. So I don't want to hear it. But anyway, so with the ladder drill, so for our listeners who want to do something similar, we do like ground ball, line drive, fly ball, ground ball, or fly ball, line drive, ground ball, just as a similar aspect of, okay, can you control the barrel? Can you manipulate the ball where you want it to go based on your bat plane? And so I love the technical aspect of what you're doing with the different degrees, but also that could be a simplified version if we don't have a Rapsodo or a Flight Scope or TrackMan or anything like that. And so let's go ahead and knock out some quick hitters real quick. You gave us some great competitions, sure, which I am looking forward to implementing. But if you could go back and give your first year self some advice, what would that be?
Oh, my first year advice.
Yeah, as a head coach, not as an assistant. Yeah, so let me clarify.
I think coming out of an organization like Atlanta at the time, and not spending a whole lot of time in the organization, but coming out of an organization that was a consistent winner, one thing that I would go back and look at is that I didn't know it all, and it probably took a World Series trip and then a trip into a really tough season in 2012 for it to smack me square in the face. After 2011, I thought, man, I'm rolling, baby. I'll probably be coaching the SEC in a couple of years. And I really didn't have any clue what I was doing even through that World Series year. And I think that has pushed me to the point where we even added a value for coaches, and we don't need to get into all of our coaching values, but one of the biggest values, and sometimes it's a blessing and a curse, is make it better. It's just simple, make it better. And it's allowed us to have humility within our coaching staff to just admit that we don't know what the heck we're doing most of the time. And that one single value, those three little words, make it better, has drastically changed everything that we do. And with the attitude that we do it with, we just don't know what we're doing. And it's okay sometimes to admit that you don't know what the heck you're doing. because that's really where the magic happens and where growth occurs.
That's really good. And I think it goes back to, instead of griping about it, do something about it. and we as coaches, we can always find things to gripe about. And I love that. Make it better. Again, consider that one stolen. And so a guy being a lifelong learner, and you've talked about some different books that you loved. And again, it's great books as far as Legacy and Talent Code and Culture Code. So if our listeners haven't read either of those three, those would be great places to start. But what's something that you've learned lately that's gotten you really excited?
Oh, man. I ran into Eugene Bleecker, who's at 108 in California. I ran into him at Perfect Game, the WWBA, a couple years back. He spent about 2 hours with me just talking hitting. We were watching a ball game. I probably missed 5 recruits that we should have been on that day, but I was infatuated with the information he was throwing at me. I just read his book, Old School versus New School. I've read it twice now, and there's so much information in there that it just blew me away. I don't even know where to start. I was just, again, blown away by the amount of information that was in that book. A lot of it's theory, but I was talking to Bleak the other day, and I was watching our field hockey team play, and reciprocal movements with the body. I'm seeing it everywhere now. I can't stop seeing it. So that's been something that has just completely changed the way I see our hitters. And I would recommend that book, and I would recommend diving into some of his theories head first. It's a fantastic read. Old School versus New School. He does a great job of combining it. Why baseball coaches have been right through the years, but now we may just have the data to back up some of the theories that were used going back to even the 20s. Mm-hmm. So great read.
Perfect. This was probably one of my favorite ones, and this is something that we can steal from you and implement tomorrow if possible. So say that you sent out a text to, let's say, your seniors, and you said, hey, you guys are running practice tomorrow. What are we doing? What would they want to do? What is something that's fun for them that if you showed up to practice tomorrow and let them run practice, what would they want to do?
Man, this sounds arrogant, but I hope they'd run practice the same way. But no, I don't. I think the competitive side would hopefully be there, but picking some things out that we already mentioned in the podcast about competition, I know that they would take square drill. I think that again, Corb's allowing us to steal that, just change the way we play defense and go about practice every day. It's taken time, but using high velocity pitching machines and challenging breaking balls at practice, if we'd have tried that 10 years ago, hitting was all about, I want to feel good. But I think challenging those guys, I think we would probably see a lot of pitching machine use. Is as big of a pain as it is to set up a 200-pound hack attack every day or 2 or 3 of them. I think you'd see that. But overall, one of my biggest theories is making practice fun. I want our guys to show up and enjoy practice, have it be one of the best parts of their days. And I think that our coaching staff does a good job at setting a standard for a high level of focus at practice, but also being able to laugh and have a good time out there, that the guys don't feel like that, they have to be tight to be focused.
Right.
And I would like to think that as they become coaches themselves or go on to bigger and better things, that they can add that part of our culture into what they do.
Fantastic. So give us a 3-thing rundown. So if we came and watched you've talked a lot of really about practice, but again, it's what are 3 things that you are usually doing or saying, or just kind of give us a look and a feel of what 3 things we would notice if we came and watched you practice. And I'm guessing one of them may be competitiveness, but I'm going to take that one away from you. You can't use that one.
I would say 3 things that would stand out that you would notice about practice. Hopefully unbelievable communication, and not just between coaches and players, but players and players. And Papa Priority is the easiest one, but consistent communication in terms of, I got it. And I think that's one thing. Again, I keep going back to Vanderbilt. Obviously that was an influential week for me in 2011.
Sure.
Seeing those guys at a high level in the SEC go about their business with amazing communication was something that took my breath away. I was like, wow, I think that's what we need to have. And gets taken for granted, but those are things that win games. Is great communication wins games. I think also, again, that looseness about our practice, where we're highly productive, but we're not in guys' faces screaming and yelling all the time. I don't know if there's another way to put that, but the intensity that some coaches bring to the table actually takes away from the enjoyment of practice. And I think that the players going out and having the motivation to go out to practice every day and want to get better can be directly impacted with our attitude and how we go about practice and
Absolutely.
the energy that we bring. So, and then the third thing is that we didn't talk about this one structure that we run. We call it regional practice, where, you show up for regional and you get 50 minutes or you get an hour on a field or you get 45 minutes on a field. And as we went to more and more regionals and we planned out that single practice, we realized, man, that was productive. We got 4 team defenses in 8 minutes, and it actually worked. And our guys are really focused. So trying to find ways like that to shorten practice some days where we feel like our players are walking away going, hey, we got a lot out of that, and we didn't spend a lot of time at the field.
Sure.
Has been a staple for us. Finding a way to get the most out of our guys each day is a key. Now, go back to that individual development. There aren't quick fixes when you're changing motor patterns that have been going on since a kid was 7 years old and his dad told him to squish the bug.
Sure.
Those things take time, but in terms of putting 36 guys on a field and trying to make a practice productive for each one of those guys and get better as a program, it can be done in much shorter time periods than a lot of guys try to go at a 5 hour. I mean, there's a lot of programs, I'm sure, that are breaking NCAA rules of practice time. It just doesn't need to be done. I always think that we can shorten that stuff up more than anything.
I love that. And again, it's kids' attention spans are shorter than they've ever been. And I love the generation that we get to work with, but that's something that is proven to be true and something that we always need to keep conscious of. And something that goes back to some football practices with periodization and having something switch every 5 to 10 minutes. I like that model. And I love that you're talking about shortening and cutting things out and making them more efficient to get more time, to get more done in a shorter period of time. But final quick hitter, what are some of your favorite books and resources? And to sum up a couple that we've talked about, you've talked about Legacy by James Kerr, you talked about Talent Code and Culture Code with Daniel Coyle, you talked about Eugene Bleeker's book, Old School versus New School. And is there any other ones that come to mind?
Oh man, I'll walk through my bookshelf here. I've read some of the Medcast stuff. I think they're great for teams. I think college kids really dig into the chop wood, carry water, transformational leadership. I know he's got a handful of others. Anything you can read on John Wooden, his stuff is timeless. Wooden on leadership was a fantastic read. It was a game changer for me. Let me see here. Multipliers, that was a big part. I spoke at the ABCA a couple years ago, and multipliers was a big one for me. Compound Effect, just fantastic read. Darren Hardy, Compound Effect. I think Compound Effect is always in effect. If you haven't read it, another great read for this generation as well. One I read this past winter, Brendan Burchard's High Performance Habits.
Okay.
Game changer for the way I go about my daily living. And I'm sure there's more. I love to read. I think that's something, if I went back to my 20-year-old self and said, the heck are you doing? You could be reading a book right now. It'd be something I would smack my 20-year-old self with and say, start reading more often.
Wouldn't we all? No, a couple of those are great that I've gotten to dig into, and I'll have to pick up the High Performance Habits book. But if our listeners, they want to get in touch with you, which I'm sure they will, because you've covered so much great stuff today and so many practical ideas, what would be the best way to get in touch with you?
Sure, my Twitter handle is @CoachShehan, and then you can email me at jshehan@millersville.edu.
Well, perfect. Well, John, I appreciate your time, and I loved our conversation. And again, you're doing a fantastic job at Millersville, and you can tell you have a passion for your players. You can tell you have a passion for player development. And I mean, I knew you were going to be a perfect fit for the show, just because the short interactions that we've had, that has definitely come across. But is there anything else that you'd like to tell our listeners before you go?
I would say continue to hammer the podcast. Ahead of the Curve. Got some great guests the last couple of years here, and check it out. And I appreciate anybody who took the time to actually listen to what I had to say. And I know Jonathan's talked about stealing a lot of stuff, but obviously that's how we go about our business. That creative guys are hard to find, but don't be afraid to reach out, and I'd be happy to help you out with anything I possibly can to grow your program.
Thank you for listening to Ahead of the Curve. You can subscribe on your favorite podcast platform, which could include Apple Podcasts, Google, Spotify, Stitcher, or YouTube. And if you're enjoying the podcast, please share it on social media to help get the word out. Once again, thank you for joining us.